Hey everyone, this is James from TDB bringing you another Inbetweenisode. Today I am going to be talking about a aged oolong tasting that I did last year at some point, and just finishing up one of the samples there. This is the Marshall and aged oolong sample that a lot of people drink there. So I am drinking sample number C here. And we actually have done a tasting of this in another video with Denny. So go ahead, check that video out if you want to get like more in-depth notes. I'm actually grandpa styling a tea here, which is a little bit unusual for me. And really, the tasting was quite interesting and I think pretty informative, just because it helps everyone to taste the same tea. And so we can sort of be informed of the different profiles. I have, some experience with aged oolong. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the subject or anything, but just having some of these teas, many of which were familiar profiles to me, and being able to talk with other people about them is just very valuable, because a lot of the aged oolongs I've had or I've gotten in my travels is like, okay, I get it, I drink it, and that's kind of the end. Maybe I'll have it with someone else or serve it to someone. But it's hard for me to discuss a tea when it's not commonly available, or it's just kind of an anonymous aged oolong. So it's just very nice to have kind of a people that you can talk about. It's like, oh yeah, I got this note from it. It's like when I brewed it grandpa style. A lot of these teas are pretty finicky with kind of how you are brewing it too. Like you could brew it gong fu, you could do it this. There was a very good discussion on water that took place too, about how people were getting kind of muddier notes depending on which water they use. So that was quite informative too. How a lot of these things aren't even necessarily our subjective preferences so much as like the context that we end up drinking it, or we are forced to drink it. In the case of water, you may not have a choice on where you live, and so you're stuck with a certain amount of water that's going to have a different mineral composition than like someone that's in the Pacific Northwest like myself. And so having it both there as well as grandpa styled has been interesting. So the one I'm doing here is C, which is an aged Baozhong. It's also interesting to hear Marshall and's different theories on how teas ended up the way they were. For instance, this one, I think, was thought to be a little bit lighter roasted, so a greener Baozhong. And, in some ways that is somewhat intuitive, but, a lot of it is guesswork, especially when I'm here operating on my own. So, yeah, just hearing someone that's way more experienced with those teas talk about it in that way is interesting. Yeah. So what he really selected for Marshall in the tasting was a variety of profiles. For instance, we were to start with A and B. A was something that was a little more semi-aged. What struck me really about A was how little it seemed aged. I would have had to guess like 5 to 10, but it had like a strong honey taste to it, and it had yet to really develop these deeper, darker aged tasting notes, such as like plum is kind of the classic one. But it was noted that this would likely move in that sort of direction. So interesting to have that. B was an example that I think is kind of a trap that you'll run into a lot if you seek out aged oolongs. And that is a oolong that has just been roasted very, very heavily. And that is what is kind of helping to contribute a lot to kind of the taste profile that you're going to get in that tea. And so that was a very, very roasty one. Not something that I would personally seek out. Some people find those to be easygoing. They are easy and smooth enough to drink, but it's not something that I would ever really choose to drink myself. And then C is here. And so this is the first one that had like significant age taste. And like a lot of these aged Baozhongs, it leans kind of into this wood leather profile. I quite like it. This was definitely one of the consistent performers for me. D was an interesting one too, because that had kind of a higher roast. So seeing what the higher roast earlier in its life might do to the tea versus something like this, very interesting. E, I believe, was the danker one. So that's interesting because that one presented a lot like kind of a heicha or a lubao or a ripe pu'er, very fermenty. And so it had just gotten wet in a very specific way at some point. And what's interesting is that got wet in a way that made it kind of develop towards that profile rather than something like sour. And sour is something that you'll run into a fair amount in aged oolong, and that's usually occurs when the tea just picks up a little too much humidity at some point. And so one way to do that, get around with it, is roasting it a bit, or you just brew it in a certain way where you bring around that sort of flaw. And F and G were kind of some of the favorites of the tasting. F had a very classic profile. It was interesting to me that that was Baozhong. I think I initially guessed it was something from like Nantou County, so more like a Dongding or something. But it had a really nice, rich plum taste that I am a fan of. And G was thought to be kind of like the best material of the batch. The only problem was it was mostly ground into dust. And so, for me at least, I did have a bit of a tricky time brewing this. What I eventually settled on was just kind of brewing with a softer hand. I had mixed results gramping this a couple times. The leaves would just go to the top, and so it didn't exactly give a great brew. But you could tell that this profile is, you could tell that there is some good stuff there, for sure. So yeah, so what is good about that? Well, part of this is because now I can talk to some of the other 50 people that have done this tasting. It's like, oh, is it presenting a bit like C, or is it more like really roasty like B? There's like just kind of a common group of shared tasting teas that we have now had together and now can serve as kind of valuable reference points. So I appreciate that aspect of it for sure. And so even someone that has had some exposure to aged oolongs like myself, I still found the tasting to be very valuable. And I obviously don't mind drinking the teas, as I am almost out of C and almost out of G as well. And those are my last two remaining. I didn't drink the rest of the ones that I didn't care for. So like B and E were not particular favorites of mine, so I gave those away. But the rest of them I did not really mind drinking at all. So yeah, that concludes this episode. Thank you to Marshall and for organizing the aged oolong tasting. Thanks also to Steam Milk for kind of creating the forum for people to discuss it. And I will see y'all next time. If you participated, let me know what your thoughts were on the tasting too. Cheers.